So thrilled that you're with us here today, and I'm going to thank you for your cooperation as we're hopefully getting close to the end with the COVID-19 protection methods. And if you ever have a question about it, go ahead and check back in with your MGV coordinator and see what your status is and where you can volunteer and what activities are up and running again. And I did want to share with you our horticulture ID contest winners from last week. Our individuals were second place, Kathy Glenn from Sarasota, second place, Kathy Fanning from Alachua, and first place was Ann Madden from Sarasota. So we're real proud of how they worked. And then on the team scores for the horticulture ID contest, Polk County got third place, Sarasota County got second place, and first place went to Alachua County. And so we're very proud of you all. We had to do it virtually. So Jim, if you didn't know, they went ahead and ID'd plants online, and it was a matching, and it was pretty difficult. Not everybody got 100, so it was good. Okay, a recap of the awards of excellence for 2021. The beautification award went to Pinellas County. The communications award went to Manatee County. Demonstration garden went to Hernando County. The diversity and inclusion award went to Hernando County. The educational materials award went to Polk County, and the newsletter went to Duval County. Also, the team award went to Sumter County. Florida Friendly Landscaping Award went to Broward County. Personal communication went to Karen Hollerman out of Manatee County. And the Outstanding Master Gardener Volunteer was from Bay County, Kim Tecca, and the 4-H and Youth Award also went to Bay County. And so, Jim, I had to put those in there because Hernando and Sumter County represented very well in the awards this year. So congratulations.
Very happy. They worked very hard. And also congratulations to other winners. It's a big achievement.
It's I'm so proud of all the MGs for stepping up and putting in their nominations this year. We also had the Legacy Awards announced last week, and Franklin County, Apalachicola got $1,500 to get some materials for bringing their program further out in their county. And Manatee County got $1,500 for an outdoor classroom. So we're looking forward to see how those projects develop. Upcoming webinars we have, Emily, I did it again. Protecting water quality is what date, Emily? Is she there?
Hold on, let me look.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's November 18th.
November 18th. November 18th. And I'll send that out early as a reminder. And December 16th is going to be Florida Botanical Gardens by me. And so I'm excited to do that. I visited Naples Botanical Garden to get fresh pictures. So that's the latest one I've added. Thank you for your patience with Better Impact. We almost have 100% adoption from the counties around the state. So I'm thrilled to report that. So keep up the good work with Better Impact. Change is hard, but you all are doing great with it. So I do appreciate it. All right. Today, our presenter is Jim Davis. He is the IFAS Extension County Extension Director. I said extension twice, for Sumter and Hernando counties, which are the Brooksville and the Bushnell area offices. Sumter is famous for the villages and many other things, but people know it for the villages. He's famous for his Master Naturalist instruction. He's a great educational or environmental educator, especially around getting people excited about Florida's nature. And so that's one of the things that Jim is really renowned for. You know, it's not a scary snake, it's an interesting snake. It's not a spooky bug, it's a fabulous bug. Jim has degrees from the University of Florida. His master's degree is in entomology, and he's just a real natural educator. It looks like it comes very easy for you, Jim. And one of the things that I really appreciate is Jim's photography. He's an award-winning photographer. It's been fun to see this skill and talent develop over the years that I've known you, Jim. It's been just a thrill to see all your beautiful pictures. So I hope I'm okay with this next picture, and I hope this is her. Do you know this one? He takes beautiful pictures of his beautiful dog. and he's loves to share her. So Jim, a big warm Master Gardener volunteer, welcome to you. Thank you so much for bringing us ethnobotany from Florida today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy. And I appreciate that. That's my first baby. We'll have to share my second baby in the near future. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint and get it going, make sure it's good. So I'm assuming that looks okay.
Yes, it does.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for attending. And I recognize some of the names, Wendy. Of course, I recognize some of my Sumter and Hernando people, but some of the people from our other webinars as well. I remember Yolanda from Osceola County very well, who attended our WISE webinar. So I'm familiar with you, welcome. If you don't know me, welcome anyway. And so we have a pretty cool talk for you. Native plants found when hiking and their ethnobotanical uses. Now I've been doing guided hikes for about 8, 9, 10 plus years now. And in Sumter County, we just started in Hernando County. And what makes a hike really fun is when you talk about the different uses by the pioneers, the Seminoles, and other Native Americans, and how they were used. So it lends to a very interesting walk. And if you're interested in some of these guided hikes, look for next year. I usually crank them out at the end of February, almost every week. So we hope to see you on those if you're in the area. So let's get started. Wendy knows me, I'm a horticulturist as well. I can't not start with a palm, right? I have to start with a palm because palms are my favorite. And I have to start with our cabbage palm. So this is our state tree. And it's also the state tree for South Carolina. And so this is sable palmetto. Okay. Now, a lot of our master gardeners say, oh, this is not a tree. That's correct. They'll say it's a grass. That's not really correct. But grasses in their own family, but they're very similar to grasses. Okay. Now the sable palm, what I love most about this palm tree is that first of all, it's a wildlife magnet. So about 10 to 25% of a raccoon's diet can be fruit from the sables. I'm a birder, I'm a wildlife photographer. If I want to go visit birds and trees, especially fruiting trees, whenever sables start producing their berries, you can see cedar waxwings, you can see some woodpeckers, robins, a whole bunch of different wildlife going back and forth between this palm tree. Now, this was designated a state tree in 1953, and in 1970, it replaced the coconut palm on the state seal. So if you've been here for a while in Florida, if you look on the old seal on the left-hand side, you see the coconut palm. So they replaced that because that's a non-native tree. And the one on the right is the current seal, which you see that cabbage palm. Floridians, if you're from Florida, odds are that you probably had swamp cabbage at some point in your life, either cooked raw or over the fire with meat seasoning. I actually had it raw. And that swamp cabbage is from the meristem, from that heart of the palm tree. Now, it kills the palm whenever you do that, so it's recommended you do smaller palms. But the swamp cabbage, I think you can buy it at the grocery stores and other places to eat. So it's pretty decent. It's okay. It's not for me, but if you've never had it, it's worth a try. And this was used as an alternative food source for pioneers and for our Native Americans. The Seminoles used the berries to treat headaches and fever, so it was used as a medicinal plant. Now you'll find in a lot of these plants in ethnobotany that there's some medicinal uses and some other uses. Some might be true, might be accurate, some might not, okay. But so I don't know if that's a scientific fact or not, but that is what the Seminoles use those for. They use this, the Seminoles and the other Native Americans use these leaves as a thatch to put over their house for their cheeky houses. And this is what you'll see on the left-hand side. It's a cheeky house. You can see where you have the leaves on top and the foundation is usually made out of a cypress. They used to use it for paddles, the leaf stems for paddles, for staffs, to gigs, to gig frogs and stuff like that. And they also use it for arrows. And they they utilize a lot of other different plants for arrows, such as our Yopon Holly and so on. The coolest thing about this plant, what some Native Americans use this for, is to make a bat. And you can find a bat at Dade Battlefield Museum. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And this bat is used for this stickball game. Okay? An abbreviation of this game is Toli. It's T-O-L-I. There is a little bit longer name associated with that. And this stickball game was not only used by Seminoles, but a lot of the southeastern tribes. Very commonly used, and it was used as a war game. It was used as a game in itself. They introduced it to the pioneers. It's kind of like a precursor of modern day lacrosse, if you want to think of it that way. So it's been around for about 400 years. So they used to make this bat out of this petiole and the parts of this palm tree. And like I said, I believe it's still there. There should be a bat at Dade Battlefield Museum if it's open in person. So I think that's probably one of the most interesting facts behind this plant. And here, the palm tree that you have on the left, you'll see the inflorescence. It's wonderful for pollinators, our native bees, our non-native bees, and so on. If you take some binoculars and look up in there, there's a lot of action going on. You'll actually get robber flies that mimic bumblebees going after other prey. So it's a pretty cool environment up there. Do other animals live in palm trees? Sure. Rodents will live in palm trees. Snakes will live in palm trees. Like I said, they're wildlife magnets. Here is an authentic cheeky house made by Seminoles. And this is at Dade Battlefield. And if you're not familiar with Dade Battlefield, it's in Bushnell. And it's a wonderful park, great for history, great for birding. And what it is it was the site of the Second Seminole War, where about 150 soldiers got ambushed by 100-ish Native Americans. So it has a pretty interesting behind it as far as that place goes. They do a reenactment every year, which I've attended since I was a little kid. And on the property, they've had the Seminole descendants make this cheeky house, this authentic cheeky house. And look at you can see the cypress that they used to make a little bench, to make, the foundation. But look how they woven it, the leaves. It's pretty incredible. And I was there when it was raining and stuff like that. The rain just flows right off. It's pretty incredible structure that the Native Americans built. And so that structure is made by this bald cypress or by this pond cypress. The Seminoles use both. If you're not familiar with the two species, the bald cypress has these feathery leaves. The pond cypress has these needle-shaped leaves. And so they used to make, the wood for the cheeky houses, oxbows, toys, coffins. They used to make coffins a lot from this plant, drums, and also canoes. So you see on the lower right-hand side, you have a Seminole, and he has that canoe, that dugout canoe. And dugout canoes were the main mode of transportation, especially by the Seminoles in the Glades in South Florida. And what was cool about the dugout canoes, man, at Cypress, is that you can hide them. So you can actually flip them over and sink them and hide them because it's not going to rot. Okay? I believe several years ago during a hurricane or something happened where they actually found a dugout canoe. And Dade Battlefield has one in their museum as well. They used to make these soft key spoons. Now, soft key is a meal, it's a concoction. It's more like a cornmeal. It's usually the most common food base out of it. Basically like a mush. And they use these spoons to mash it, if you will. And so you have this young lady right here in the middle with some large soft key spoons that were made out of cypress. Now in 1980, 1995, the harvesting doubled in Florida. So we like to protect our cypress trees. Well, you're master gardeners, you know the whole story behind that. So I'm not gonna, Not going to talk too much about the cypress mulch and so on. These are very long-lived plants. They can live over 600 years. Okay. They do have an interesting little one. I had to put this one here because, I have to get this one because it's named after me, Jim's little guy. So this one's reported gets about 8 feet. So it's a little dwarf. So I'm going to try to find that and plant that in my yard. It's an underutilized tree also, by the way, especially for bald cypress. It's a wonderful plant to put in the landscape, great for wildlife. A lot of owls utilize it. You have some night herons will perch on these cypress trees. It's just wonderful for wildlife. Then you have saw palmetto, Serenoa repens. Now you can tell a lot by the scientific name of the plant, right? So alba means white. You all know that. Repens actually means creeping. And how it got its name is if you're an avid hiker, if you've seen very, very mature saw palmetto, you'll see this stem, the trunk going along the ground, creeping along the ground, hence repens. In Florida, we call those gatorbacks, okay? And so a really old saw palmetto whenever you see this large stem, especially if it's vertical, about my height. Saw palmetto was used by the Seminoles as an aphrodisiac. You can find it in stores today to treat the prostate. I think Florida is still the biggest exporter of saw palmetto fruits. I think it's in the last time I checked, it's in the 100 million-ish, somewhere a year at that. The fruit was used as an alternative food source by pioneers and Native Americans. The new stalks were cooked or eaten raw if food was scarce. Okay? The Seminoles used this plant and make fiber. The Seminole dolls that they still make, they utilize this plant for this. Their fire dance ceremony, so they made some fans because it has a palmate leaf out of this plant. And this plant right here was listed as into the state's list of commercially exploited plants. In order to harvest berries from this plant, was state, county, or public lands or whatever, you have to have a permit from the Florida Department of Agriculture, Consumer Sciences, I think it is, FDACS. So this permit, you can go on FDACS website, download this permit. They'll give you an example on how to fill it out. And you have to have this permit to collect this fruit. If you don't, you're going to get in trouble, and I'll show you a couple examples. But saw palmetto, you can see the inflorescence, wonderful for pollinators and plants. The one on the right, you have the saw palmetto, the green. The one on the left, you have the silver. One of my favorites, you'll see that a lot on the East Coast. Another wonderful landscape plant utilized for wildlife as well. People say, oh, Jim, if I get a saw palmetto, I'm going to go rattlesnake or another snake. Yeah, sure, just like your other plants. This is Florida. You have snakes everywhere. It's fine. But see a snake, leave it alone. But use this plant. I like to use them on the corner of houses, with silver, get some yellows and reds, really makes it pop. So here's some examples. So this is actually pretty recently. Some Immokalee men were arrested and accused of illegally harvesting of saw palmetto berries worth more than $5,000. That's it. I think it was 4,600 pounds. Now there's varying rates between per pound. Could be $2, $3, whatever. But this 4,600 pounds equated about a little over $5,000. And so this is what they were legally collecting. So they got arrested because that's some illegal behavior. And then in Collier County, people are arrested for picking berries. So it is a big thing. There was also another story, a guy, I think it happened in 2020. I think he got arrested with 150 pounds of berries. And he was arrested on the person's property. Unbeknownst to him, it was a police officer's property. I think it was a chief or something in that county. So that's bad luck. Here's the saw palmetto berry harvesting frequently asked questions. Just go to FDACS, type in saw palmetto berry harvesting FAQs. You'll find it. You'll find the application. and some frequently asked questions if you're interested in that. Okay. Buttonbush, Cephalanthus. Now, most people are coming to Florida when they're on my hikes, they're unaware of how many poisonous plants we have, native poisonous plants that we have. Some are poisonous, but some are also used medicinal. Okay, you have to do it, you know. So all parts are said to be medicinal. How they work that out, I'm not sure, but this is also a very poisonous plant. So it's fatal to cattle. But the inner bark was used for dental procedures, to treat the liver, you know, eyes. Seminoles used for constipation, prostate. And I always wonder how they, you know, how they figured that out and how they fixed it and how many times that worked and didn't work, right? So the leaves were used as a tea, specifically for women, the blood disorders and fevers. And so some modern day herbalists use it to stimulate the digestive system, treat nausea. But like I said, it has bitter glycosides, and bitter glycosides are toxic. So it is fatal to cattle. So don't go out there and start, you know, using it for yourself. Here are some stamens, if you will, on this plant. They're much like a bottle brush. It's round and very, very good for butterflies, believe it or not. Eastern tiger swallowtails like to go to this plant. It is not a plant that likes dry feet. It does like wet feet. Okay, gets kind of big, so give it some room. Actually, can get very big, but it's a good wetland plant, transition plant. Then you have the American beautyberry. I'm sure most master gardeners are familiar with this. You know when it fruits out, when it flowers. This is the white right here. This was one of mine at the time. A little bit not as vigorous growing as the purple, but pretty cool whenever you mix them together. The Native Americans use this to treat all sorts of things. Use this in the sweat bath rituals, malarial fevers, dysentery. The berries and roots and leaves were steeped in it to make a tea to treat skin disorders and stomach disorders and colic. There is a jelly that you can make out of beautyberries. One of my master gardeners makes it, and one of my master naturalists made it for me. And it is pretty good. I have to say it's pretty good. I'm a muscadine jelly person. To me, there's no better jelly than muscadine, but it's right up there. It's pretty good jelly. It's said to repel mosquitoes, and there's two chemicals inside it that were identified for that. One of them is called calicarpinol. So it's said to repel mosquitoes, ants, and ticks. And the Native Americans and pioneers used to crush the leaves and rub this on their skin and clothes to keep away the mosquitoes. I still have people on my hikes, especially some forestry people that come along, that kind of swear by it. So they'll take that, take these leaves and, put it on their clothes and skin to help keep the mosquitoes away. Pioneers, what they also used to do, keep mosquitoes away from their horses and mules under the saddle or under the saddle or cattle blanket, whatever. They used to crush these leaves and put these leaves under there to help keep these mosquitoes away. And again, American beautyberry is an excellent plant for birds, especially those who, like mockingbirds, for example, who change their diet, go from insectivores to frugivores, and they'll start feeding on those beautyberries in the wintertime. You're a photographer, just hang out by a beautyberry or waxberry, and you'll see a lot of birds. Waxberries, wax myrtle bayberry is a very interesting plant. This is one that it's still on my folks' property. I planted a long time ago. It can tolerate dry feet, can tolerate completely being submerged for about 3 to 4 months in water. You do have berries that you can make this wax out of. So 4 pounds of berries to 1 pound of wax. You make these bayberry candles. The wax was used as surgeon soap, shaving lather, as a sealing wax. The Seminoles fermented the leaves to treat fevers, headaches, and stomach aches. So a lot of uses. This plant was said to repel insects. So it was common to plant this plant around the perimeter of a cabin to keep the bugs out. Probably not the smartest thing to do, because this is a very flammable plant and very flammable. So it has these resins or oils inside these leaves that will catch fire very quick. Okay. The newlyweds of the pioneers use these ashes. So whenever you burn a wax myrtle leaf, burns very quick and produces this little gray ashen leaf. And so what you do is what they did is they put that on their tongue to strengthen their marriage. So pretty interesting uses from this plant. So another good birding plant, excellent, not very wind tolerant, based on my experience. And they do have a dwarf variety out there that you'll see in the villages, but just another great wildlife plant, something that people see all the time. And they're like, wow, I did not know. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is, if you're on a hike, it's okay to pick a leaf. If you're in a town square and you want to check out some plants, I always encourage people to crush a leaf and smell it. Each plant has a lot of the plants have their own distinctive smell. So you can crush this plant and smell it. And wax myrtle smells different from a sweet gum versus a beautyberry. Okay. A lot of these plants are very aromatic because of the resins they have, or the oils that they have in their leaves. Then you have live oaks. Live oaks were used as dyes, tannins, for astringent, used as animal feed as well. So both the Seminoles and the Native Americans used the acorns as feed for their horses. It was a food source for Native Americans and settlers. And the acorns, they actually utilize these acorns in the softki, or they roasted them. So they definitely use them as a food source. And you have your white oaks and red oaks. Your red oaks, the acorns have a lot of nutrition, much more than white oak acorns. The only thing is that the red oak acorns are very, very bitter. So that's why the animals feed on the white oak acorns. They do have these little galls. Master gardeners know what galls are. And the legend behind the galls is that there's little people living inside it. Okay. Here is a live oak on my folks' property in Zephyr Hills in East Pasco. And that oak's been there as long as I've been alive. So I'm sure it's pretty old. And you'll see the oaks filled with resurrection fern, Spanish moss. We'll talk about those in a minute. But live oaks, I consider it kind of like the keystone species, like we have gopher tortoise and alligators, kind of like that. There's so many animals that live in live oaks, so many insects, other invertebrates. You have your red-shouldered hawks will nest in it, and just wonderful, wonderful plants to use when used in the right place. Then you have your Yopon Holly. Most of y'all know what Yopon Hollies are. Now, that the leaves are very high in caffeine. They make this Yopon tea now. This is something that's not new. These behaviors they go away and they come back. This was created by our Native Americans. They used to make what's called this black drink. Now, they made it out of several other plants, another plant, but it's mainly Yopon. So this black drink, they made for their fire dance ceremonies, sometimes to chase away nightmares or to cure old people's sickness, whatever that is. And they also used it to make branches. Excuse me. The branches were used to make arrows. But this Yopon tea, you have this gentleman right here making this Yopon tea. I actually have an agent that makes Yopon tea. The villages grown makes Yopon tea now. So It's very, very high caffeine. It gives you a kick. You know, if you want to try it out, it's pretty cool. But you know, Yopon Holly is another plant that that is great for the birds, and either for nesting or to eat. If you notice the scientific name, Ilex vomitoria. So how do you think it's got its name? You know, when it said that when people drank this excessively, it kind of came right back up. So that's how it's got its name, vomitoria. And we have Cherokee bean, coral bean, whatever common name you want to give it, Erythrina herbaceae. This is a pretty interesting plant. I have coral bean that was a straight up ground cover, no more than 8 inches tall. I've had some that are 3 to 4 foot tall, and I've had some that are 15 foot tall. So there's a lot of variety in these Cherokee beans. The most interesting, one of the cool, interesting fact about this Cherokee bean or coral bean is that the seeds, you know, it produces these little red seeds that y'all have seen on the right-hand side. Kind of looks like the precatory bean, and it is very poisonous. So the seeds were used as rat poison, specifically in Mexico. So the seeds can be toxic. Okay, so just keep that in mind whenever you have kids or pets. Okay, it can cause severe vomiting and diarrhea. How many fatalities in humans? I don't know. I don't think it's as poisonous as a precatory bean or castor bean, but still, you don't want to go out there and use that as a food source. The interesting, cool thing about it, the plant has very interesting leaves. They're heliotropic, so they kind of face towards the direction of the sun, which is pretty neat. Definitely recommend getting this plant if it's for you. The red tubular flowers are great for hummingbirds and sulfur butterflies and so on. It does have these little thorns on them, so they can bite you. But it is a deciduous plant, but it's a very cool plant, very interesting plant. So the flowers will come out before the plant flushes out. And if you're into bonsai, makes a great bonsai plant. Carolina jessamine. This is another very poisonous plant. It has a lot of alkaloids in it. So humans have been known to be poisoned from sucking the nectar out. And that's a southern thing that we do on coral honeysuckle. Coral honeysuckle, you actually suck out the nectar. You don't want to do it with this one because it can be toxic. I think the last time I read years ago, I think it was a couple kids who were sucking out the nectar and died from it. So, and some, you know, you can ask Dr. Jamie Ellis about the toxicity towards bees. He's more apt to answer that question. From what I've told, it disorientates them. It's not a good thing for them for our European honeybees, not for our native bees. So that's something you can ask him. Very poisonous, so it can cause staggering, uncoordinated movement, convulsive, comatose, and including death, okay? The rhizomes and the roots were actually used for medicinal purposes. How it was prepared, that's unknown to me at this time. It is very flammable. It is a very flammable plant. It's a very aggressive native plant. Whenever they do these prescribed burns, this helps control this plant because it'll take over in a natural area. So you want that those native forbs and those other plants to come back for a wildlife. This was our demo garden at the time, and great for nesting birds and everything. The only thing is our master gardeners built an herb garden right next to it. I had them remove the plant because the flowers were falling in the herb garden, and I didn't want people to think that that was an edible plant. So, but it's in the right place. It's a wonderful plant, but just keep in mind it's very, very poisonous. Also, to your livestock. So if you have horses and you don't have that much grass, the horses will feed on this and they will get sick. Okay. Then you have your Maypop, Passiflora. Now they call this one Maypop because this is kind of a game that pioneer kids used to do. They used to jump on the fruit. I don't know if y'all have ever stepped on the fruit before, but it does pop very loud. It's pretty cool. So it makes this popping sound. The fruit and skin can be eaten raw or cooked. I've never had it. Said that you remove seeds. You can make the pulp used in jams and syrups and other beverages. Some of these passiflora fruit, are these sedation drugs around Europe and the US. It does contain these cyanogenic glycosides, which are, as you know, a plant's natural defense against herbivores. And, but is a great plant for butterflies, Gulf fritillary, zebra longwing, and Julia. You'll see this plant in natural areas growing as a ground cover in the woods. It has this beautiful flower, absolutely gorgeous purple flower, but pretty cool, interesting plant as well. And then you have your muscadines. Now, Wendy can chime in on this. Now, some people correct me on the scuppernongs and muscadine. I think scuppernong is a variety of muscadine, if I'm not mistaken. But I always grew up calling them muscadines. You have some Floridians call them scuppernongs, but these are the muscadines that's on my folks' property. You want to chime in on that, Wendy, real quick?
I just had heard that scuppernong was sort of a nomenclature that came from the Carolinas and sort of trickled down into Florida. So we do use them interchangeably.
Yeah, some Floridians are like, I make scuppernong jelly. I'm like, it's not scuppernong jelly, it's muscadine jelly. Where are you from? But I always grew up calling muscadines. These are our muscadines we have on my folks' property. In our old house on our other property, we have my grandpa's muscadines that are my age, 49 years old. So they can live for a very long time. And you can pass them down. I'm a big fan of muscadines. The interesting thing about the muscadines that used to take the long stems, you ever seen the long stems of muscadine? They actually used to make deer snares. The Seminoles used to make deer snares out of these and twines. And obviously it's a food source. But your native muscadines, some produce the fruit and some do not, but these are your cultivated muscadines right here, Carlos, Noble, Black Beauty, whatever. Those are all very, very good ones, but you'll see muscadines used, growing in basically every natural area out there. Then you have your red maple. One of our beautiful maples here that demonstrate some fall color in Florida. They were introduced in the 1800s to settlers by Native Americans. And, anything from ox yokes, cooking ware, arrowheads. They used to drink the sweet drink from the sap. And it's not saccharum, but it is they do get some sugar from this. Acer species were used for the liver and skin disorders. So that's another widely used plant out there. And y'all all know butterfly weed. So y'all know what it attracts, but this was used to treat pleurisy, which is inflammation of the thin layer of the tissue that lines the lungs and chest wall. Used to treat bruises and sore muscles. And the Southeastern tribes boiled it like a vegetable and used to eat it. And when used with Indian hemp, it was made into a strong cord fiber. So pretty interesting history behind the Asclepias that most people just only know it to attract our monarchs and queens. And then you have other plants out there such as your button snake root, rattlesnake master. They call it rattlesnake master because it was used to treat snake bites. Sap was used as a preventative. I don't know if that works or not. I wouldn't give it a try. But the roots and shoots are eaten, cooked, sometimes raw, chewed up, used to feed as a fever treatment by settlers and other Native Americans. It was used to expel worms and used for vomiting and impotence, and also prepared warriors for battle. So a lot of wide uses for this for this plant. Oops. And we'll skip that one. And then we're going to do sweet gum. And I have a fondness for sweet gum. The leaves are very aromatic. If you ever crushed them, they smell really, really good. It's in the, I believe it's in the witch hazel family, Hamelidaceae. But it has these little gum balls that if you walk barefoot, it's going to hurt. So if you see these on the ground, you have sweet gum. Sweet gum is these transition plant between wetlands to a little bit more drier area. Civil War doctors use it as an astringent to treat dysentery. It has storax. American storax is used today to, in cigarettes, candy, soda, chewing gum, and so on. And it's used today to treat coughs, colds, skin infections, and bronchitis. So another interesting plant. It gets really, really tall, so it's not for most homes, but one that you'll see in every freshwater area system around, either right next to the area or a little bit higher in elevation. And like I said, it's a little different from the Acer rubrum because the Acer rubrum has these red petioles and not as many leaflets there, points. But this one has a little five-star leaves, and again, very, very aromatic. And cool texture bark. And so this is a hemp vine, climbing hemp vine. So the Seminoles use this as a dermatological aid and for itching. And you'll find this on the coastal swell, rivers, margins, and floodplains, and kind of blooms year round. I'm gonna go, whoops. And then you have, whoops, I'm getting delayed there. So I wanted to show this one too, because this is Florida betony. This is our weed. Okay, rattlesnake weed. I don't know how many of y'all have this in your yards. I've had this forever in our pasture, and it used to grow. I'm a bromeliad nut. So at one time on my folks' property, I had 300, 400 bromeliads. And this would always pop up between the bromeliads, and there's just pain to pull. And they always had these roots. And I never really knew much about them back at that time, but the tuberous roots are edible. And one of my master naturalists fixed them for me as far as their project, and they're actually pretty good. If you want to know about edible plants, if you're in our Central Florida area, Kristen Wood, who's works at the Dade Battlefield, she does a lot of edible plants and teaches you how to cook all these different things, weird things that you see out in the natural areas. It is in the mint family, but like I said, this Florida betony, this quote unquote weed, these tuberous roots are quite good. Then you have smilax. Some people call these different things: bamboo vine, greenbrier, wild asparagus. That's how I grew up calling it, because the tips look like asparagus and actually pretty good. They're very good. So it's an excellent food plant. This plant is used as a dye for medicinal uses. It's used as a thickening agent from the rootstock used in jellies. Seminoles use it as a form of starch. They used to make bread and fritters out of it. Sometimes they'll make those at the Dade Battlefield reenactment. Modern day uses include synthetic cortisone and steroid production. You have a lot of different types of smilax out there. Has an intensive root system. It's pretty crazy on the root system that it has. We actually used to grow it on our barbed wire fence around our pasture to keep people and other animals out, because nothing's going through a thick strand of smilax. And so it makes a good barrier. And we used to pick off the tips and eat them, hence wild asparagus. Here you have on the lower right, you can see on this wild asparagus there, this is one of the first plants that come up during a prescribed burn as well. And this was at the Natural Area Teaching Lab in Gainesville, where they did a prescribed burn, and you can see what's been feeding on it, and that's deer. And it surprised me there were that many deer at the Natal area, and quite a number of deer track. And they were pinching all these tips on these wild asparagus. The deer absolutely love it, so it's a wonderful wildlife source. Then you have elderberry. And elderberry was a food source for settlers and Native Americans, used to make toys and textile dyes. Elderberry jelly, I have never had, but some people do make these jams and use it for pies and syrups. People do take these flowers, they dip them. Typical Floridians, they deep fry everything. So they fry these flowers and put them in and eat them. Used as medicinal, antiseptic, used to treat bee stings, but it also has cyanogenic glycosides as well. Okay, so don't go out there and use this plant unless you absolutely know what you're doing and getting an expert to teach you. Then I have to put pickerel weed in there because this is one of my favorite aquatic plants. The seeds and young leaves unrolled can be eaten raw. That was a big thing for the Midwestern tribes. Can be eaten raw, or seeds can be roasted to ground into a flour mix. Seeds were used as a granola mix, and some U.S. tribes use it as a contraceptive. That's pickerel weed. Has a beautiful purple flower, excellent pollinator. So even some of the aquatic plants have some medicinal uses, or uses that were used back in the day. Then we have our pines. Now I'm just going to show you slash pine. You know, we have long leaves and loblolly and so on. So this is slash pine. This is found in low, wet, flat woods, used for turpentine, resins, basically in the naval stores industry for waterproofing ships. And they used to take these, used to gather this material using this old clay pot. Sometimes you have these metal things that they just drive into the pine at kind of like 45-degree angles. They call this cat facing. I never understood why they call it cat facing before, but it looks like cat's whiskers. And that's why they call it cat face. But in some of the, if you're very, very lucky, you know, you run into one of these pine trees that have the clay pot and these old, you know, metal things on it, if you're very, very lucky. But you can still see the remnants of cat facing, and they're getting harder and harder to find because obviously the trees are getting older and you're going to lose some trees naturally. U.S. was the largest producer of turpentine, most coming from Florida. And here is the remnants of a cat face. This is an old pine tree. This is at Dade Battlefield. They still have some, I think this is a longleaf. They still have quite a few pines out there that have these remnants of the cat face, this cat facing on that. And then you have pokeweed or pokeberry. All parts are poisonous. Floridians make this poke salad out of it. You have to fix it the right way. So the young leaves are eaten as a vegetable when prepared correctly. They do have some commercial products exported to different countries. Was used as a medicinal plant. It's used to treat chronic rheumatism, even ringworm. Now it can be I guess it's the sap in this or leaves or whatever that can cause some dermatitis that may affect some people. So it's recommended that you wear gloves. And it has caused some fatalities with people in the past. This is also another poisonous plant for your cattle as well, or other livestock. But poke salad was a very common thing back in the day. Then you have your golden polypody and your resurrection fern. These are called epiphytes. Resurrection fern is on the lower right. And obviously they call it resurrection fern because, you know, when it's dry, it looks dead. When it rains, it shoots to life. And this resurrection fern, what the Native Americans used this for was a bath. And they use this bath to treat people who were not mentally well, and was used to treat them. Okay, you know, and so that's what they use these plants for. And so these are these native plants in these palm boots of these sables. So yes, it's not gonna hurt the palm tree. It's a native thing. Perfectly fine. Then you have mistletoe. And this is a parasitic plant. They call it thief tree, phorandendron. So all parts of this plant are toxic. And it was used as a medicinal plant. And it's the only food source for the great purple hair streak. From 1985 to 1992, there are a little over 1,700 cases of accidental poisoning with children or pets. So, you know, mistletoe, they use it for during the holidays, during Christmas, you know, but for this plant right here, you just want to make sure that that kids and pets stay away from it because it is a very, very poisonous plant. Then you have your Carolina willow. And these are the Native Americans used to extract salicin from the bark to relieve pain. They use it for this cooling medicine. It's to ward off fevers. Emetic, they use it as a emetic and analgesic. And they also use this type of root concoction to increase a hunter's success whenever they went out. It is a host plant to a viceroy butterfly. And willows are another extremely important plant for birds. So you have these willow heads in these ponds and lakes that can be used by anhingas, great blue herons, and so on. And if y'all see these birds nesting in these trees, don't go near them. Just look at them from afar. Then you have your black-eyed Susans, your native black-eyed Susans. Seminoles use these to treat sunstroke. They use them using teas and colds. They use the root juice for earaches and to treat snake bites. And that's your typical black-eyed Susan. All right, then you have your coontie. And I absolutely love coonties. It's our oldest cycad. Been around for a very, very, very long time. And so the flower base of these plants, they actually use these roots. You have to wash them, you have to boil them and ferment them in order for them to be edible. Native Americans who preceded the Seminoles, like the Calusa, use these plants as well. Was used as a flower base in the softy. These seeds, they're dioecious as well. So the seeds are very toxic. They're actually quite a number of pet deaths have occurred and other animal deaths. One of our former livestock agents, Dennis Mudge, poisonous plant expert, said this is probably one of the biggest killers of dogs in the state because little puppies like to chew these orange seeds, which are carcinogenic. So don't pick them up with your bare hands. Okay. And obviously you have this, here you have a Native American Seminole using these soft-key spoon, and they use the trunk end out, and they used to take this material from these coonties and take this soft key, and this is actually not a spoon, but it's more like a masher, and used to mash it and make into like a little mush as well, so they can put it in the soft key. And so the Miccosukee, that's their word for it, Conti, K-O-T-I, and the Seminole had their own word for it as well, Conti Hateca, if I pronounced it correctly, hopefully. And I think this is the last one I have, and I have to put this one last because it's such an interesting, cool plant that we have in Florida. It gets a bad reputation, and this is Spanish moss. Okay, it's the epiphyte. It's the air plant. If you look under a microscope with this plant, you'll see little scales, little trichomes that actually capture these nutrients from rainwater. It's not Spanish, and it's not a moss. Okay, it is a bromeliad, so it's the same as your pineapple and other bromeliads. It's not parasitic. Okay, it's not going to directly cause the death of your plant. Here's a pretty interesting picture on the left. I've never seen it used like this. Now I've seen people drape it over barbed wire fences for whatever reason, cosmetics or something like that. I've seen people use it. I've even used it as mulch for my plants. It makes a wonderful mulch if you don't want it on your trees. But this was a botanical garden in San Francisco. And they had the Spanish moss growing hanging basket. And I'm like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. That looks really, really cool. The Native Americans used to use the Spanish moss to rub it on newborn babies for curly hair. I don't know if that works or not, but that's what they used it for. They also used it to absorb these unwanted liquids. So a lot of these poisonous plants that we talked about, to absorb some of these unwanted liquids, they use Spanish moss to do that. They use it as bedding. I know people who make saddle blankets out of it. Back in the day, they use it to fill car seats, mattresses, and other stuff. And so automobile cushions. And so on my grandparents, who were very, very poor, used to rake this from the trees to get extra money in Tampa. And there's a gin. I don't know if that's the one, but that is a gin in Tampa, the one on the right, that they used to take this Spanish moss to, okay, to process it. So in 1900 and 1975, this ginning occurred in Tampa near the Ybor area. Like I said, it's not Spanish, not a moss. So the reason why it's got it, I'm going to give you a condensed version of this for time's sake, because there's many variations of this story. But how it basically got its name is you have this Gores. His name was Graybeard, this Spanish conquistador or Spaniard that came to Florida. He said to marry a Native American princess. And so she didn't like him. So she ran away. He went out, he chased after her. She climbed up an oak tree. He climbed up after her to go get her. Well, I think there was a lake or river next to it, and she jumped in. She's a good swimmer. So she jumped in, escaped him. He got stuck. He got stuck in the tree. He couldn't get out. And since he had a big, big gray beard, whenever they went looking for him, he blended in with the Spanish moss and they couldn't find him. So he ended up dying. And that's how it got its name. There's variations to that story. So I don't know how they come up with that story, but but it's pretty interesting, pretty cool to tell it when you're on a hike, you know. But that's basically how it got its, why I'm assuming that's why it's got its name as far as Spanish. But one thing that we used to do as kids that was passed down by my grandparents, and we actually used it to catch fish, small fish. So you take Spanish moss and you put it on the edge of a creek, not really a lake, more so like a creek or a little river, and put it on the edge, and minnows will go in there and tadpoles, mainly minnows, and then you can pull that Spanish moss up and they'll get tangled up and you can catch minnows. I don't know, that's how I grew up doing it too. So, but promote Spanish moss. I love it. It's wonderful for our nesting birds, swallowtail kites, red-shouldered hawks, bald eagles. It's a must. Bats roost in it. Make sure you get Spanish moss from the tree, not on the ground, because you get chiggers. It's just a wonderful plant, so don't give it a bad reputation. And I think, Wendy, I'm just on time. A couple of resources that I just want to give y'all real quick. If you ever visit the Atlas of Florida Plants, we have a lot of University of Florida resources, which y'all are familiar with. The reason I'm showing this is because some of those pictures I got permission to use from this Atlas of Florida Plants. They're very, very nice, and they love for people to use their pictures as long as it's for education. Has a lot of great resources on there, a lot of great pictures. Just email them for educational uses. They'll let you use them. So I have to plug them because they were very, very nice to me. 50 common native plants, and the Florida Ethnobotany book is a wonderful resource. So that's basically all I have. I know we probably have some questions, but hopefully I can answer some of them.
We do. We have a lot of fun questions and good comments. People bringing up the fire in Jacksonville in 1901, started at the Spanish moss plant there. And somebody wanted to know if you were going to create a hanging basket of Spanish moss like you showed in the picture, do you think that there needs to be any soil in it?
No, it's an epiphyte. It doesn't need soil. Okay, so you can just shove it full of Spanish moss in there, like hanging down. I was thinking about doing it with my house. I think it looks pretty cool.
Well, and somebody brought up Sydney Park Brown, who we both know and love.
Absolutely.
Used to decorate old bare lampshades with it. And Sid also she created a slat orchid house that was living with Spanish moss, which is a really cool project that I've always wanted to try myself. Greg McGann wanted to know, do chiggers live in Spanish moss?
Chiggers can. So chiggers live on the ground. Chiggers are a mite. And what they'll do is if you pick them up or if you don't wear insect repellent, they'll get on you. They love constricted areas like near your socks or near your belt line because they have such small mouth parts. So they embed in you and they suck out your blood. They don't, I grew up, Wendy, I don't know if you heard this as well. I grew up saying that chiggers burrowed into you and you had to use clear nail polish to smother them out. That's not true. So it's the saliva that causes this allergic reaction. And they usually fall off by the time you get home. So if you go home and immediately take a shower, the odds of that happening will greatly decrease. But if you get chigger bites, they're going to last for 3-4 weeks. It's no fun.
Yep. And that saliva is basically digesting your skin and your flesh, which is, oh, well. So
awesome.
Everybody is warning everyone else about Florida botany and how aggressive it is. And somebody wanted to correct you that we say poke salad with the T on the end, not
poke salad.
Poke salad, Annie. Gators got your granny. Somebody wanted to know about, is the heart of palms in the grocery store can the same as what we get from the sable palm?
I don't know if it's the same or not. I don't know the origin.
No,
I don't know. I don't think it is.
I don't think it is. But I personally like swamp cabbage. I think it has a flavor of green beans. But I could also get green beans and not kill a palm tree. Palm tree.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let's see. Somebody wanted to know why you think why the Spanish moss opts for the live oak in many cases.
So here's why I think it really opts for the live oak. So Spanish moss flowers. So in the seeds float. It's kind of like dandelions. Think of it that way. So whenever you see these oaks, specifically live oaks, what does the trunk look like? It has this vestigial bark, these crevices, right? And so whenever these seeds float in the air, they're going to easily attach to live oaks more than any other plant. So I think that's why they kind of gravitate towards live oaks in most cases. That's what I think. But you'll find them. I see them on power lines. Wherever those seeds, wherever they float, wherever they can catch hold and stay still, they're going to grow.
Right. Somebody is saying that they wanted to mention the Ilex vomitoria and the tea from that, and the Yopon Brothers Tea Company, how much they like that tea from Yopon Brothers. And I'm going to give a shout out to them because I like that tea too. Have you had it yet, Jim?
No, Now I'm going to have one of my agents, Matt Smith. Matt makes it, so I'm going to have Matt make some tea for us in the office.
Yeah, my favorite one of theirs is Warriors Blend. Get you all fired up for the day. It does have good amount of caffeine in it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of talk about the Larry Williams from Okaloosa said that Scuppernong was the first name for Muscadine, so that's good. And just folks very interested in all the beautyberry jellies and that sort of thing. Will Croton linearis and the sensitive pea grow from cuttings? I don't know if you know that one.
I don't know.
Okay. Someone wants to know if you'd be willing to share your slides with them in the future.
Nope.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. Absolutely. So just email me and I'll send you a PDF copy. And please, if I tell people, if I don't respond to you, please send it again, because extension agents, we get 100 emails a day, but I will absolutely send it to you in a PDF. Be happy to.
Resurrection Firm, one of my live oaks has this plant, but didn't see it before. Is this because I just didn't notice it, or can it start naturally?
Yeah, you probably just didn't notice it because it spreads by spores, and whenever you look at a tree, you'll see a small little green leaf, and it just grows from there. You just probably didn't notice it, and most so it eventually spreads from that. So odds are that it was already there.
Great. Someone was talking about the best way to eliminate Carolina jessamine. I'm not a fan of eliminating it because it is a good native. I know it does. You said it was more flammable, and I didn't realize that. So that's interesting. Would you eliminate it, Jim, or would you keep it around?
It would have to be right plant, right place. So, you have to give it the room to grow. It's a very aggressive grower. So if you have the room, if you don't have kids or pets, you're not worried about it, let it grow. If you have to remove it, then you probably just need to, I guess, cut it down and get Stephen Enlow's advice for that and how to properly remove it.
Yeah, Stephen could figure out a way to get rid of it.
Oh yeah.
Someone says, well, the manufacturer of the tea is Yopon Brothers. I'm putting that up there for Roger. And Jim, if you'll share a PDF of these slides, I will post it along with the recording in a couple weeks so everyone can get the recording.
I'll send you the PDF.
That would be great. So I think I'm going to go make a bath of resurrection tea for my mental issues.
I have some ideas for that too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jim, thank you so much. At the top, our peak, we had 400 people on today.
Nice.
So everyone, go ahead and take that Qualtrics survey on your way out. Jim came up with some really cool questions for you. And Jim, we look forward to the next time we can see you. Thank you so much. We appreciate
Absolutely. And one last thing I have to say, I always say this to everybody, every citizen we have out there, including our county administrator and county commissioners, master gardeners are the best. So you guys are an extension of what we do. We cannot do what we do without y'all. So we're very appreciative of everything that you all do. So thank you very much.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Jim. We'll see you next
All right.
time.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily.